Hello, welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I am Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. I'm a terrible critic. I haven't done a lot of review-style videos. I'm unlikely to. Gaming material, yes. Movies, comics, things like that, probably not so much. I'm a terrible critic because I'm very easily engaged. A movie has to be super bad before I will find fault with it. Things that other people think are just horrible or questionable, I generally kind of liked. If it got me fist pumping and shouting in the middle of the movie, I'm probably going to be a fan. This is not to say that I like every movie, because there are a lot of movies that don't make it to that level. I don't like to speak ill of things I didn't particularly enjoy. I'd rather ignore them. I'd rather dig into something that I do enjoy. And even if other people don't seem to enjoy it that much, I can understand why they don't. And that's fine. Happy to discuss it. Life is too short to focus on things that suck. There are a few subjects that I'm probably going to talk about in the future where I'm going to end up being somewhat critical. Remember, I'm not necessarily good at being critical. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. My review of D&D, 5ed, very positive. I reviewed Cthulhu Punk and had to be disappointed in it because it was a heartbreaker. So I will do that if it is necessary. So I want to talk about comic books a little bit. Remembering, I'm a terrible critic. And if something has gone so far away from hallmarks of quality that I have a need to express a criticism of it, it's pretty far gone. And when I talk about comics, I'm not looking at a particular company, and I am looking at the print version of comic books. I'm not talking about cinematic universes or forays into television or cable shows, because Lord knows, in the past few years, that has all been absolutely amazing. With the exception of Fan 4-Stick, which I have commented on. I did not start my love affair with comic books. I started with cartoons. Syndicated cartoons in the 1970s, and to a lesser degree, later in the 70s and early 80s. The old 1960s Spider-Man, as wild and batshit crazy as that show occasionally got, I loved that show. And I loved that portrayal of Spider-Man. Super Friends, the Filmation Justice League comics or cartoons, anything they did as a Batman series, from the Adam West live action series all the way through all of the animated Batman series. I love them. Very fond of them. And that was my entry to these characters. The cartoons didn't always treat the continuity from the comic books or the villains well at all, if they even bothered. Sometimes they would come up with their whole new stables of villains that had no representation of the comics. But since that was my entry, that was fine. But my brother was a collector of comic books. Not a huge collector, but he had a nice thick stack of them. 13 years older than me, so I've been doing it for quite some time. By the time I was 6. And he got out of it. Stopped reading them, stopped collecting them. A little bit every so often. So I got the collection. Read it through once. My parents came in, realized some of them might be a little bit old for me, took some out. Understandable, because comics had some fairly mature themes. Whether they were addressed as that or not, comic could be damned. But I read those, especially if they had robots in them. I was a big fan of robots. But I expanded my horizons a lot reading those comics. I got to know the characters in more depth than I had been able to through the cartoons. And the characters and the characterizations of the comic books in those days were just incredible. They weren't deep. They weren't usually well thought out. Sometimes they were. In Marvel comics, they would have more deep, well thought out characters. And in DC Comics, you had the comic books where there's a story in the back from the time during when Superman and Lois Lane were married, and Clark Kent buys a new car and it gets stolen that night, and Superman goes out to find it, and he found it in another city by using his super smelling. With his right nostril, he was smelling Lois's perfume because she'd ridden in the car, and with his other nostril, he was smelling this very specific, unique, new car smell from his car. Not deep. Not brilliant writing, but it was fun, and it was engaging. And for me, as I was growing up through those next few years, that was really good. I learned a lot about writing and about story and about pacing, much of which I had to unlearn over the years. But I loved those comics. They were written to reach out and grab a young mind and engage it. Yeah, there were robots and there were demons and there were cyborgs and clones and people with superpowers who had elected to use them for evil instead of for good, or just to try and get by. And there were misunderstandings between heroes constantly. If I jump back over to read into the Marvel material, there were tragedies and angst, and Peter Parker never managing to get a damn break, but still picked up and soldiered on. And you knew that even if he couldn't pay the rent at the end of that issue, even if he didn't get the girl, even if things went badly for him, he was still walking away the hero. Even at his most tragic moment, when his girlfriend Gwen Stacy died as a result of his actions, he still picked up and went on. Those pre-mid-80s comic books were brilliant. I'm not going to say they were good in the same way that I don't like to criticize things. But if it engages me, and if it strikes a chord between heart and mind, something that I can recognize as heroism, strength of character, not just being able to bench press the planet, which at the time Superman could technically do, but something that demonstrated what it meant to be a hero. Even when the comic books started to address more issues of societal problems and real-world difficulties. Marvel had been doing a bit of this. DC jumped straight in. Green Arrow's apprentice, Speedy, got hooked on heroin. People were being abducted and indoctrinated into cults and had to be partially deprogrammed. People are confronted about the questions about you're a superhero. Why aren't you out there just stopping everyone from committing crime? The moral and ethical issues. Amazing stuff. And even for my mind at that age, 12, 13, 14, it made me want to address those issues. It made me want to see how they were addressed. The comics became thought-provoking. And while there was still a lot of biff bam pow, because you need a biff bam pow, there was also some, oh my God, Speedy, you're a heroin addict. That hit. Mid-80s, something happened. DC had a huge problem with disparate storylines and continuity issues because they had solved the problem of why would this be different for this hero, for this story, by creating a whole bunch of alternate universes. Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth Prime, Earth C. And all of those continue to grow and spread. It became a very convenient plot twist or a plot contrivance to make the action happen in another universe, and that way you don't have to worry about things happening to the main continuity. And that didn't fly. It became too complex and too hard to manage. So they had a series called Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was brutal. It was mature, and it was as catastrophic as it had to be. The horrific destruction, annihilation of whole universes as people either tried to escape the annihilation that they just couldn't and watched everything that they loved die before they faded into oblivion, or you're the character pariah who's forced to watch this over and over again, unable to stop it. We lost some heroes in meaningful ways. We lost a Flash. We lost Supergirl in Crisis. And it wasn't a footnote. It wasn't a minor thing. These were splash pages. These were whole issues devoted to heroic last stands and everything that these characters stood for coming to the forefront and driving them to levels beyond anything that we'd seen in comic books before. I hated Crisis, and I loved Crisis, and it changed comic books. It changed DC, but it changed the landscape. It took what had been permissible up to that point in time and blew it wide open. For good or for ill. Marvel, not to be too outdone, had a series very similar called Secret Wars. It wasn't as catastrophic. A character known as the Beyonder took all the heroes and villains out of the continuity to an outside universe and made them fight to see whose ideology was best. And they had to fight the Beyonder to demonstrate that the last thing you can do is deprive free will to all these people. And out of that, Spider-Man got a new costume. Eventually turned into Venom, but that's pretty much the long and short of it. Not a lot was accomplished. They left, they fought, they came back. But it changed a little bit of the business of comic books and started this spiral. Yes, you could tell more mature stories, and yes, you could get more in-depth in things. Yes, you could lay this gritty realism over things. And they did, Marvel had been doing it for years with their angst and such. DC started doing it. They got some Marvel people to come over and Marvel up some DC titles, most notably the Man of Steel series by John Byrne. And really leveled things a bit. I collected comics personally through the 90s. I mean, I collected every issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I collected Watchmen when it came out because, my God, why would you not collect Watchmen when it came out? And that also, it wasn't part of the main continuities, but it was this amazingly dark look into the realities of a world where these people put on masks and go fight crime. A 12-issue miniseries. I followed mostly Marvel through the 90s. In particular, Iron Man and Silver Surfer. I followed Thanos and the Infinity Quest and the Infinity Gauntlet, which was more of a Crisis on Infinite Earths for Marvel, where they really dug into things. I own the Death of Captain Marvel graphic novel. So I've seen the dark and gritty side of this and enjoyed it for the most part. It didn't take away from that heroic archetype. It let it play a little bit more. It upped the stakes for being a hero. Because in a more realistic world, being a hero has much harsher consequences for you and for those around you. I love the genre. I really do. But then the 2000s came, and things started to go downhill. Now, there's a wonderful series by S.F. Debris, I believe, called The Rise and Fall of the Comic Empire, which talks about all the behind-the-scenes stuff that was happening that changed how the comic book industry as a whole operated, with different mergers between distributors and different demands being placed on artists and new companies rising and falling. But the long and the short of it, what I took out of that time was, if you put Wolverine in another title, that title will sell better. That began a horrible set of trends. Well, you can follow this extended story arc, but not just in this one title that you are already collecting. There are going to be events in this title over here and this title over here that you need to read if you're going to understand everything in the title that you follow. You couldn't be a selective collector like I had been. You couldn't get all of Armor Wars or Armor Wars 2 just by having Iron Man. Well, you could, but for example, you had to read all of the series that you were already reading, but you had to jump over and grab parts of other series. And while you're over there, why don't you grab the whole series? Because that lines up with another storyline. Marvel and DC both did this. Both still do. For a while, it sold more comics. How could it not? And then you get the one issue that is really important. It's so important that it has 5 variant covers. And if you're going to call yourself a collector, you need to buy all 5 copies, all 5 different variations. Everything on the inside is the same, but this cover, all in black and white. Artist signature, very artsy. This cover, hologram. Who doesn't love a hologram? This cover looks like it's dripping in blood, and here's the foil cover, so you can signal planes with it because it's all shiny. This amazing storytelling medium that we had gotten used to became a marketing medium. The storytelling fell by the wayside. The stories didn't make as much sense. And what I particularly disliked, before this trend started, even in Marvel, if a hero died, it was meaningful. There was a reason. It was something tragic, but it was purposeful for the story, for the characters around them. And yeah, a character could come back from that. A lot of things are possible in comics, especially if you're trying to retain a copyright. So dead characters could occasionally show up again, or they're cloned, or they were resurrected by someone, or super science put them back together. Okay, that's comic book genre, but that doesn't mean that you can just kill beloved characters right and left. And then you start doing alternate timelines where Wolverine kills everyone in the Marvel Universe. Punisher kills everyone in the Marvel Universe. Deadpool kills everyone in the Marvel Universe, although I'm willing to let that one go. Professor X gets killed by an X-Man. Which one? It's been a number of them so far. He has died a number of times in regular continuity. I'm surprised the X-Mansion doesn't have they take a number sign for who gets to kill Professor X next. It's gone from being a shocking character moment. Oh my God, Cyclops killed Professor X. That was his mentor. That was a person he considered a father. How could that happen? To bad comedy? To this incredulous, you're expecting it anymore. We're going to work down the line until Jubilee kills Professor X. I'd read that comic. The rosters change. Characters die. You follow this character? Okay. They're kind of a minor character? Sorry, they're probably going to bite it. I started my career in association with these characters and with this genre because it was fun. That's what I'm looking for when I go for entertainment. That's why I'm a bad critic. It's because what I want when I'm reading a comic book, watching a movie, reading a novel, I want fun. If some tragedy occurs that makes the heights of the story that stand out that much more, okay, it's part of the story arc. There's highs and there's lows, and then you hit the highs and you have a resolution. It might not be a high resolution, it might be a low resolution, but there's something in there that makes it worth my time. There's payoff. Payoff is a concept that not enough people in modern comic books, game design, what have you, understand. Payoff is when you have gone through all of the time and effort involved in getting through a piece of literature, whether it's a novel, a movie, a comic book, or a computer game, and at the end of it, there is a satisfaction that what you have seen people engaged in or engage in yourself, the things that you have invested in, your emotional energy in this thing, has brought you a dividend, has brought you a feeling. For me, payoff is invariably something warm and fuzzy and deeply satisfying. Even if it's revenge. If it's the character, the hero dies but with a smile on his lips, and the villain doesn't understand why until he pushes the wrong button, and oh, it was a trap all along, and the villain's dead. That's payoff. It's dark payoff, but it's payoff. Comic books, for the longest time, knew how to pay off. And they don't anymore. Comic book movies are as successful as they are these days, I believe. One, because people who loved these comic books in the 70s and the 80s and early 90s are involved in making these movies and television shows. You've seen Daredevil or Jessica Jones or The Avengers or Iron Man. You have seen people who love these characters treating them the way the characters need to be treated. And there's payoff. I will start to read comic books again when the people who are currently in charge of them stop making them. When a generation who's been raised on these movies studies art and writing and starts making comic books. The people who understand payoff. One of the most rewarding experiences I've had in a role-playing game of all time. A friend of mine named Michael Shields wanted to run a Marvel Superheroes game. The classic Marvel Superheroes game from the 1980s. Phaser Rip, produced by TSR. Well, Phaser Rip is just how people refer to it. It's an anagram of all the statistics of the characters. And it's very specific to Marvel Superheroes and might not be adaptable to any other genre, but oh my god, for Marvel Superheroes, it really works. And what he did through this campaign was he took all the horrible things that were happening in Marvel Comics in the 2000s. And we fixed them. We had our own superhero team, and we went into the situations that were wrecking the comic books for all of us. And we fixed them. We got payoff. That is the joy of role-playing games. And that if you've got a grip on an intellectual property and it upsets you, you can go in and fix it. No one has to know about it but you and the game master. But wonderful things can happen. I still love old comics. So a crap load of graphic novels in this collection. Superhero role-playing games on those shelves. A number of them. But I'm going to stay away from the print comics for a while until they learn to pay me off again. Well, thank you for joining me through this particular ramble. I hope you enjoy it. If you liked the video, hit like. If you didn't, give me a comment, give me some feedback, give me a question if I was too vague about anything. I try not to name too many names. A couple that needed to be named. If you'd like to see these videos when they come out, hit subscribe. I can always use more subscribers. Subscribers are awesome. If you super liked this video, I have a Patreon page. www.patreon.com/DeCorum. To have a visit, consider becoming a patron. Any donation helps. If you only want to donate so much in a month, cap your donation. I'm perfectly happy with anything I can get at this point. Thank you again for watching. This is What Mattered to Me. I'm Scott Corum. I'll see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can, spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes a Spider-Man.